Is that what you're telling us? You just won't tell us?
Sounds like your fight might not be with me, but the Office of Government Ethics.
Just one little place where you disagree with Donald
Well,
Trump.
I do have a disagreement, actually. He said that he thought I was out of central casting. I think central casting, I'd look older, grayer, and maybe show up here with a cigar of sorts.
Sometimes a Senate hearing gives you policy, sometimes it gives you theater, and sometimes, if everyone's lucky, it gives you a full-blown political faceplant wrapped in a 5-minute exchange. That's basically what happened when Elizabeth Warren tried to corner Trump's Fed chair nominee, Kevin Warsh, and instead ended up walking straight into the kind of calm, dry response that makes a whole room laugh before anyone even realizes the punchline landed. Because Warren came in swinging. She wanted drama, she wanted a viral clip, she wanted the big gotcha moment. But what she got was a reminder that not every witness is going to sit there and play along with a political ambush dressed up as oversight. So buckle up, because this one has everything. Ethics accusations, Trump references, 2020 election questions, Fed independence, private investments, and one of the weirdest name one thing you disagree with Trump on moments you'll see in a Senate hearing. And before we get into the chaos, hit like, subscribe, and drop your take in the comments, because this exchange says a lot about where Washington's priorities really are. Warren started with the serious stuff, and to be fair, there was a serious topic sitting right there on the table. The Federal Reserve has had credibility problems in recent years, especially when it comes to ethics. When people in powerful financial positions are making decisions that affect interest rates, inflation, markets, mortgages, jobs, savings, and retirement accounts, the public has every right to ask whether those officials have conflicts of interest. That part is fair game. Nobody wants the person running the Fed to have secret financial interests that might benefit from rate cuts, rate hikes, market moves, or inside knowledge. That is basic common sense. The Fed is supposed to be boring in the best possible way, stable, independent, trusted. The second it starts looking like a private profit machine for insiders, the whole thing turns toxic fast. So when Warren asked about Warsh's investments and whether he had fully disclosed everything to ethics officials and the public, that was not automatically an unreasonable question. But here's where it started going off the rails. Instead of letting him answer in detail, she began cutting him off. Warsh tried to agree with her on the importance of Fed credibility. He basically said, yes, ethics matter, credibility matters, scandals hurt the institution. That should have been the perfect opening for a real discussion. But Warren wasn't there for a discussion. She wanted a yes or no answer to questions that sounded simple but were clearly loaded like a political grenade. She asked whether certain funds were invested in companies tied to Trump, money laundering, Chinese-controlled businesses, or vehicles connected to Jeffrey Epstein.
So the Fed has been plagued by deeply disturbing ethics scandals in recent years involving at least 6 Fed officials. So it's critical that the next chair have no financial conflicts, none. You have more than $100 million in investments that you have refused to disclose to ethics officials and to the public. So let me ask, do the Juggernaut Fund or the THSDFS LLC invest in any companies affiliated with President Trump or his family, companies that have facilitated money laundering, Chinese-controlled companies, or financing vehicles established by Jeffrey Epstein?
Senator Warren, thank you. So let me first share a point of agreement with you. The Fed has 2 tools. One is its monetary policy, and the second is its credibility. And the scandals that you talked about, the ethics problems you talked about, went to the core of the credibility that has hurt the Fed.
Could you answer my question, please? It's a yes or no question.
That is not a casual yes or no question. That is a televised trap wrapped in a financial disclosure question. And Warsh's response was basically, I have worked with the Office of Government Ethics. I have reached an agreement with them, and I will divest before taking office. Now, whether you like him or not, that answer matters, because the Office of Government Ethics exists for exactly this kind of thing. It is literally the referee on these disclosures. If the ethics officials reviewed the situation, reached an agreement, and required divestment, then the next logical question should be about the terms of that divestment, the timeline, and the safeguards. But Warren kept pressing as if the refusal to publicly list every private asset immediately was proof of something sinister. And here's the complication that gets lost in the shouting. Private investment funds do not operate like a Robinhood portfolio screenshot. If someone is tied to a private investment firm and bound by confidentiality agreements, revealing every detail publicly before divesting could expose the firm's strategy, its positions, and its clients. That does not mean there should be zero oversight, absolutely not, but it does mean there is a difference between confidential review by ethics officials and a public performance where a senator demands answers designed to sound explosive on social media. That's the line Warren blurred, and Warsh called it out without even raising his voice. He essentially told her, "Your issue might not be with me, it might be with the Office of Government Ethics." Translation, I followed the process, I worked with the officials, I agreed to sell. So what exactly are we doing here? That was the first crack in the performance. Then Warren moved to the next angle. If he divests, will he disclose exactly how he sells those assets? Or will he simply collect a giant check from someone whose business depends on predicting what the Fed will do? Now that question has more substance, because divestment can create its own issues. Who buys the assets? At what price? Is there a sweetheart deal? Is the buyer connected to someone with business before the government? Those are real questions. A smart senator could dig into that for 10 straight minutes and actually uncover something useful. But that is not where Warren stayed. Instead, the whole thing began sliding into the familiar Washington pattern. Start with ethics, then pivot into Trump, then pivot into loyalty tests, then pivot into 2020, then act shocked when the witness refuses to turn a confirmation hearing into a partisan cage match. And that's exactly what happened.
I have worked tirelessly with the ethics officials at the Office of Government
Yes,
Ethics.
and you have not
come to an
revealed
ethics agreement with
$100 million
them and
in
have agreed,
assets.
Senator, to sell all of
That's
my
not
financial
my
assets,
question. Mr.
including
Warsh, are
the
you
Duquesne
refusing
assets.
to tell us if you have investments, for example, in vehicles set up to advance Jeffrey Epstein? Is that what you're telling us? You just won't tell us?
Senator, as you know, it sounds like your fight might not be with me, but the Office of Government Ethics. I have come to full agreement with them and have agreed to divest all of those assets,
I'm asking you
especially
a very
those that you
straightforward
referenced
question,
before I
Mr.
take the
Warsh,
oath of office.
and that is, will you disclose how you divest those assets, or will you just collect a check for $100 million from someone whose whole business is betting on what the Fed will do?
Warren accused Trump of not wanting an independent Fed. She quoted him saying that anyone who disagrees with him will never be Fed chairman. Then she suggested Warsh was basically Trump's sock puppet, pointing to Trump's comment that interest rates would drop when Kevin gets in. Now, let's be honest, Trump talking about interest rates like he's ordering off a menu is not exactly new. He likes low rates, he likes pressure, he likes public loyalty, and yes, anyone nominated to lead the Fed under any president should be asked whether they will maintain independence. That is a legitimate concern. But there is a way to ask it that produces useful information. You can ask, will you resist pressure from the White House? Will you commit to making decisions based on inflation, employment, and financial stability? Will you promise not to communicate privately with political officials about pending rate decisions? Will you publish your framework? Will you protect the Federal Open Market Committee from political interference? Those questions matter. Instead, Warren went with, did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election? And that was the moment the hearing stopped being about the Federal Reserve and started being about cable news. Because what does that question have to do with monetary policy? What does it tell us about inflation? What does it tell us about bank supervision? What does it tell us about interest rates? What does it tell us about whether Warsh can handle pressure during a financial crisis? Not much. It tells us whether he is willing to step into a political battlefield that has nothing to do with the job he is being considered for. And Warsh, clearly understanding the trap, did not take the bait. He said the election was certified and tried to keep politics out of the Fed. That was probably the smartest answer he could give in that moment, because the Federal Reserve is not supposed to be the place where every political argument gets relitigated forever. The Fed already has enough problems: inflation, interest rates, housing affordability, banking stability, debt markets. The last thing it needs is a chair who turns every hearing into a partisan therapy session.
My
So
assets
Donald
before
Trump
I take
has
office.
made clear that he does not want an independent Fed. In fact, he has said, and I quote, "Anybody that disagrees with me will never be Fed chairman." And he's made clear that you are his sock puppet, saying last week that interest rates will drop, quote, "when Kevin gets in." Yeah, I think they do. Not when economic conditions change, we'll get lower rates. Not when the economy needs it. Nope. He said, when my guy, Kevin Warsh is in there. We'll get the interest rates that Donald Trump, wants. So independence takes courage. Let's check out your independence and your courage. We'll start easy. Mr. Warsh, did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election?
We try to keep politics, if I'm confirmed, out of the federal.
I'm just
Reserve.
asking you a factual question. I'm asking, did Donald Trump lose in 2020?
And I'm suggesting you in 2020, the Fed made a huge inflation problem, and you certified the election.
And that's the irony here. Warren was accusing him of not being independent enough from Trump while trying to force him to perform an anti-Trump loyalty ritual in public. That is not independence. That is just a different kind of political pressure. She was basically saying, prove you're not controlled by him by answering my political question exactly the way I want. Come on, that is not oversight. That is a trap door. And Warsh handled it by staying boring, which is exactly what a Fed chair should be in that situation. People may not like that answer because it does not create fireworks. But the Fed is not supposed to be fireworks. It is supposed to be the adult in the room while everyone else is setting off bottle rockets in the kitchen. Then came the part that really exposed the weakness of Warren's approach. She asked him to name one part of Trump's economic agenda that he disagrees with. Just one little disagreement. Again, on the surface, you can see what she was trying to do. She wanted him to prove he had distance from Trump, but the question was framed like a schoolyard challenge. Come on, tough guy, say something, prove it. Warsh began answering by talking about the Fed staying in its lane. That is actually a meaningful answer. The Federal Reserve has wandered into areas over the years that some critics believe are outside its core mission. Climate policy, social policy, regulatory activism, public messaging, all kinds of things that go beyond setting monetary policy and supervising banks. A Fed chair saying the institution should stay focused on its mission is not nothing. But Warren interrupted again, demanding one place where he disagreed with Trump, and then Warsh landed the line. He said he did have a disagreement with the president. Trump had said he looked like he was out of central casting. Warsh said if that were true, he would probably look older, grayer, and maybe show up with a cigar. The room laughed. And that laugh mattered. Not because the joke was the greatest joke ever told. It was not exactly a Netflix special, but it landed because everyone could feel the ridiculousness of the exchange. Warren was trying to create this dramatic moment where Warsh either condemned Trump or revealed himself as a puppet. Instead, he deflated the whole setup with a joke so mild it almost became sharper because of how calm it was. He didn't yell, he didn't snap, he didn't give her the meltdown clip, he just sidestepped the trap and made the room laugh. That is how you know the line of questioning had lost its power. Warren then came back with the familiar warning, we need an independent Fed chair, and if he can't answer these questions, he doesn't have the courage or the independence. But that argument only works if the questions actually measure independence. Refusing to answer a political purity test is not necessarily cowardice. In fact, in a room full of politicians begging you to join their food fight, refusing to grab a fork might be the most independent move available.
In our meeting, you said you would be independent because you're, quote, a tough guy. Those were your words, tough guy. And you will be able to stand up to President Trump. So let's try it again. Name one aspect of President Trump's economic agenda with which you disagree.
Well, Senator, the Federal Reserve in recent years has wandered outside of its remit, wandered into other areas.
I'm asking for something
That's
you
not something
disagree
I'm
with
prepared
Donald
to do.
Trump on.
If I'm confirmed, the Federal Reserve should stay in its lane.
Just one little place where you disagree with Donald Trump.
Well, I do have a disagreement, actually, Senator, with the president. I think even this morning, he said that he thought I was out of central casting. I think central casting, I'd look older, grayer, and maybe show up here with a cigar of sorts.
Quite adorable. But you know, we need a Fed chair who is independent. That's the only way we preserve the independence of the Federal Reserve. If you can't answer these questions, you don't have the courage and you don't have the independence.
I agree with you on independence, Senator.
And that is the bigger problem with Warren's performance. She has the skill to do better. She is not some random senator wandering into a financial hearing with no understanding of the subject. She knows banking, she knows regulation, she knows corporate power, she knows how financial conflicts can warp institutions. She absolutely could have used her time to press Warsh on the real mechanics of divestment, transparency, monetary policy, bank oversight, inflation election targets or how he would handle direct pressure from the White House. Instead, she went for the viral clip, and that's what is so frustrating, like, because the country actually needs serious questioning at these hearings. People are getting crushed by prices, families are locked out of the housing market, small businesses are getting squeezed by borrowing costs, retirees are watching savings get eaten by inflation, workers want wage growth without another price spiral, banks want stability, markets want clarity, everyone has a stake in what the Fed does. So when a senator gets a chance to question someone who could shape the direction of the entire economy, every second counts. And Warren spent part of that time asking about the 2020 election. That is exactly why so many people roll their eyes at Congress. They watch these hearings and think, are you people actually trying to solve anything? Or are you just farming clips for your social media teams? Because let's be honest, both parties do this. Republicans do it, Democrats do it. Everybody wants the moment, everybody wants the soundbite, everybody wants the headline that says they destroyed someone, exposed someone, or left the room stunned. But every once in a while, the person in the witness chair does not cooperate, and when that happens, the whole performance starts to look flimsy. That is what happened here. Warren came in trying to paint Warsh as compromised, evasive, and obedient to Trump, but the more she pushed into political theater, the easier it became for him to look like the calm one. The more she interrupted, the more he looked measured. The more she demanded a partisan answer, the more he looked like the person trying to keep the Fed away from politics. That is not a win for her. And there is another layer to this. Voters are tired of selective outrage. When politicians talk about conflicts of interest, people immediately wonder whether the same standard applies to them. Congress has its own problem with money, donors, committees, industries, lobbying, campaign cash, stock trading, and influence. So when senators lecture nominees about private interests, the public hears the question behind the question. Okay, but what about you? That does not mean nominees get a free pass. They do not, but it does mean the messenger matters. If you are going to climb onto the ethics high horse, you better make sure the horse is not wearing a lobbyist saddle. That is why Warren's attack felt hollow to a lot of people. The concern may have been legitimate, but the performance made it feel political. And once it feels political, half the audience checks out before the answer even lands. The real missed opportunity was simple. Warren could have trapped him with substance. She could have asked whether he would commit to publishing a full divestment timeline. She could have asked whether any buyer would be screened for conflicts. She could have asked if he would recuse himself from decisions affecting former holdings. She could have asked whether he would commit to no private communication with Trump about rate policy. She could have asked what economic indicators would justify rate cuts. She could have asked how he would respond if Trump publicly demanded a cut during high inflation. Those questions would have been much harder to dodge. Instead, she made it about loyalty, and Warsh beat her by making it about temperament. That is the part people should pay attention to. In high-pressure roles, temperament matters. The Fed chair has to sit through political pressure, market panic, global uncertainty, angry senators, hostile presidents, and the constant possibility that one badly worded sentence can move billions of dollars. If someone cannot stay calm in a hearing, how are they going to stay calm when markets are melting? Warsh stayed calm. Warren got theatrical, and whether you support him or not, that contrast was obvious. Now, does one hearing exchange prove he would be a great Fed chair? No, of course not. A funny comeback does not equal sound monetary policy. A polished answer does not erase questions about financial disclosures. And nobody should pretend that joking about central casting settles concerns about independence. But politics is perception, and in that moment, the perception was brutal for Warren. She was trying to expose weakness and ended up highlighting his composure. She was trying to paint him as a puppet and ended up looking like she was pulling strings of her own. She was trying to demand independence while using political pressure to get the answer she wanted. That is why the clip works. Not because Warsh delivered some savage takedown. He didn't. He did something more effective. He refused to become the character Warren was trying to cast him as. And in Washington, that's rare. Usually these hearings devolve into predictable scripts. Senator grandstands. Witness dodges, senator interrupts, witness repeats talking point, everyone goes home and posts their clips. But every so often, someone breaks the rhythm. Warsh broke it with humor, but more importantly, he broke it by not letting Warren dictate the frame. That is what made the moment sting. At the end of the day, the Fed should be independent, ethics should matter, financial disclosures should be taken seriously, and any nominee for that level of power should be questioned hard. No one is entitled to glide into a position like that without scrutiny, but scrutiny scrutiny is not the same thing as spectacle. A serious hearing should make the public feel more informed. This exchange mostly made people feel like they were watching another episode of Washington's longest-running reality show. Everyone is outraged, nobody is solving anything. And that is the real takeaway. Warren had a chance to make a serious case. Warsh had vulnerabilities she could have pressed. The Fed has real questions to answer. The economy has real problems. But instead of drilling down into the issues that affect people's lives, the hearing veered into Trump 2020 and a loyalty test disguised as a question about independence. And Warsh walked out of that exchange looking like the adult in the room. So now the question goes to you. Was Warren right to press him hard, or did she completely overplay her hand? Because from where I'm sitting, she came in looking for a viral moment and accidentally handed him one instead. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like if you enjoyed the breakdown, and subscribe for more straight-shooting political commentary. Because if this hearing proved anything, it is that Washington can turn even the Federal Reserve into a circus, and somehow the clown car still has room for more.